I'm Alfredo. I'm with May 1st People Inc., and we're talking about Marxism. Come up with first idea. If the working class is going to run this revolution, lead this revolution, it's really clear that you got to talk about the population from which the working class comes, which is humanity. Now, Marx and Engels confront a very stark situation. There are all these kinds of animals on Earth, very powerful species, some of them much more successful than the human race. Dinosaurs, for example, lasted much, much longer than we have thus far, and maybe than we will, given the way things are going. Species that are stronger than us, that appear to be more efficient in many ways. But they don't make revolutions. They don't alter the society and the world the way we do. What is it about us that makes us special? And it wasn't an empty question. At this time, the time of Marx and Engels, the world is afire with debates about the nature of human beings, human nature. And Marx and Engels look at all of these definitions: image and likeness of God, have a mind, build societies, all the things that make us unique from the rest of the animals, that make our human nature very special. And they find one thing: it's not consistent. It doesn't pertain for all stages of human history. The way we use our minds changes. Our religious views change radically. Our social interactions are very different, for example, today as opposed to the year 3000 BC. Our view of ourself changes. All of these things are altered. And Marx and Engels determined that this alteration is based on the impact that the conditions of society have on the human nature. Human nature isn't something that develops outside of the context of the world in which we're living. It is a function of the world in which we're living. It is an outcome of the world in which we're living. It is some kind of dialectical product, if you will. Something that arises from the conditions that surround us, clashing with what we are. So if it's a product of this clash between the world and what we are, it can't be what we are. There has to be something deeper, something more consistent and permanent that runs through the entirety of our history. Marx and Engels discard the concept of human nature and embrace a deeper, what they consider a more radical or more basic concept that in German is called Gutenswesen, which means species essence. And species essence of the human being, Marx and Engels put forward, is that we produce the means of our subsistence. That's what makes us special among all the animals. We produce the means of our subsistence. Yeah. That's good. And it's good that you started using the question. So? Okay, so I'm going to tell you so. The other animals on Earth, and this is important because people sometimes get that phrase wrong, and they read it as produce our own subsistence. While it may be argued we're the only species that actually produce our own subsistence, that's not what Marx wrote. There should be no argument about this. The other animals exploit nature to eat. They hunt other animals to kill and eat their meat. They take twigs and sticks that they find to use it as tools, so that they can get insects and things to eat. They use the surroundings to build nests. In fact, Marx said that any beaver would put the average architect to shame with the quality and perfection of the buildings that they do. They do all of these things. But Marx has a telling phrase in one of his works in differentiating the human being from the rest of the living things. He says all living things eat when they are hungry, and they hunt in order to eat. But we hunt when we're not hungry and when we don't have to eat. We store. We dig up plants and store them. Early on in our history, we begin replanting plants. We begin cooking the meat that we get from animals that we hunt in order to store that meat, in order to preserve it. We look for ways to preserve things. We take the skin of the animals and use it to clothe ourselves, changing its purpose. Not only do we use the twigs, but now we refashion the sticks and stones that we find around us to make tools that make our lives more efficient. We change those things that we use to make our shelter. In living, we change our environment. And we are the only species that does that, that consciously changes our environment. Others change their environment unconsciously, but we do it consciously. We do it while we're thinking. We're thinking. The production of the means of our subsistence generates our thinking, and we think about it. In fact, in order to do this generation of the production of our subsistence, we got to think about a future. How are we going to improve what we're doing? How do we improve this stone to make it a better tool? Thinking about the future. In order to think about the future, you have to do two other things. You have to understand what you're doing today, and you got to remember what you did yesterday. So it's not only about planning for the future, but our minds allow us to understand and analyze the present and develop a history about the past. This capability, called intellect, is generated by this need to produce the means of our subsistence, and it interacts with that constantly. Marx never felt that it is the means of subsistence alone that defines our history. Our history is defined by a multiplicity of factors. But he understood that the generation of those factors that affect our history and affect our lives and affect us, they are motored by this production of the means of our subsistence, this Gutenswesen. It's materialist in character. So that all human experience has a material basis. And Marx believed that the material realities of our life drive all of the other realities, including intellectual realities and all the rest. It's also not pure. By that I mean, you don't go through life, and we as a human race have never gone through life doing exactly as we want all the time. Just automatically moving through existence unchallenged. Everything we do comes into conflict with the world that we're in. That's part of human experience. That's why we do what we do. Think about what you do. When you do something, you do it to change what's around you, but it has to be based on the impact what's around you has on you, limiting you, putting you on a certain path. You can't just do things ignoring the rest of the world, because then your efforts would collapse. This relationship between ourselves and nature, among ourselves as human beings, between ourselves and other species, is ongoing in human experience. It's not only a part of human experience, it's not that it affects human experience, it is human experience. And according to Marxism, this concept, Marx took a concept that Hegel had worked with extensively, called dialectic. This dialectic is human experience. It is the essence of human development. It is the essence of the functionality of the world. Marx wrote, talking about this dialectic, that Hegel believed that the dialectic of ideas is what affects the world. Ideas actually form our vision of the world. This is called idealism, as you know, as you probably know. Marx rejected that, and he said, listen, it is the world that affects your ideas. It's the opposite. Turn it and put it on its head. So, in this Grundwesen, this species essence, this production of the means of our subsistence, we have the thread that goes through all history. Not all Marxists believe that. There are a group of Marxists influenced by structural Marxists. The great French Marxist Louis Althusser held that there is a young Marx and a more mature Marx. The young Marx is this guy we're talking about, writing in the years between 42 and 45. And then there's a later, more mature Marx who discards certain of his fundamental ideas. And one of the ideas he discards is species essence, which Althusser felt was an idealistic idea. It is true that in later work, Karl Marx does not use the term. He doesn't refer to the term species essence, and he doesn't remark on that as specifically as a thread that's consistent through human history. But it's there. I see it there all the time. In fact, I can't understand Marxism unless I understand that the species essence of the human race is the production of our means of subsistence. Otherwise, none of it makes sense to me. And so I include Grundwesen as the first idea that is fundamental to Marxism, the one that would drive history, move it forward. I'll explain so after I say this section. I'll be right back.